Watch the ocean kiss the moon. Run away with me, where the morning paints the scene. We're the fire, we're the glow. We found love, we won't let go. In the twilight of the night, see the colors burst in the sky. Watch the world fade away. We're wide awake. Searching through the stars for magic from afar. Look inside, you'll see the magic's underneath. We're the fire, we're the glow. We found love, we won't let go. In the twilight of the night, see the colors burst in the sky. Watch the world fade away. We're wide awake. We're wide awake. We're wide awake. We're the fire, we're the glow. We found love, we won't let go. In the twilight of the night, see the colors burst in the sky. Watch the world fade away. We're wide awake. 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 Open your hands, stand in the light, watch it begin. We're gonna shine, growing, changing, moving, chasing, come alive. Sturdy, steady, we are ready, feel the fire. We are, we are, we are, we are, we are stronger together. We are, we are, we are, we are, we are.
our counseling program, and we've got a night for you. I'm really excited to be able to speak into your marriage. We're going to be talking about spiritual connection, sexual connection, emotional connection, and we're even going to have time at the end for a Q&A where you can you can go into the chat bar. If you're full screen, make it a little bit smaller, go down into the chat bar and throughout the night, give us your questions, because we then want not just to impact you in terms of information, we want rubber hits the road stuff. Yeah, but what about this? Or what about this situation? Bring it our way. We want to respond to that at the end. So I hope you're able to settle in a little bit, that this is a date night. We called it that on purpose because we want you to enjoy just being with your spouse. Maybe you've got a nice spread there on the table. Maybe you've got something nice to drink, desserts, whatever. Maybe you don't. Maybe you're in your sweatpants and kids are screaming in the other. I don't know what's happening there. Hopefully, there'll be a little bit of slowing down for you, and you're able to hear from God about your marriage, where you can go, and this will be a step forward in your relationship. But as we start, let's pray. God, I thank you for this time. I thank you for each of the couples. And I imagine even some people aren't sitting with their spouse. Pray for everybody who's tuned in right now, that they would hear from you, that you would be ministering to them, that you'd be challenging them, you'd be encouraging them. And by the end of tonight and going into tomorrow, that they would be another step along in their marriage. Love on them, care for them. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, I'll start off with, I have an incredible wife. I do. Not perfect, but an incredible wife, Rachel. We've been married for 18 years. We have 4 kids, 2 boys, 2 girls, grade 10, grade 12, grade 6, grade 4. And we, like many of you, especially if you have kids, trying to figure out how do we do this whole school at home thing, and especially our grade 12. He's closing out his senior year, his grade 12 year, and he wants to see his friends. He wants to do those things. And so we're trying to keep him going to graduate. And then even our youngest, we're trying to keep him sitting at the table so that he can actually do his work. So it's been a bit of a challenge, but I feel like we're getting our rhythm, our norm. And hopefully that's the case for you too. I find it goes in waves a little bit of, hey, this isn't so bad. Oh, I hate this, and everything in between. It's quite a journey. Our family's been on quite a journey. So I did my grad school down in Southern California. So I did 2 masters and a PhD. It was crazy. It was full. We had a lot going on. But it was also fun. Like, it was Southern California. You got the sun. You've got the beaches. It was wonderful. It rains like 7 days of the year. And we had a lot of guests come. It was awesome. So they would come. We had the space for them. We'd then go out to the malls, to the beach, just be outside, go to the park. And we loved it. And it was difficult at times. What would happen is we'd have a regular rhythm, a regular routine, and Rachel and I would have our time together typically. And then as guests came, we wouldn't have as much of that. It became difficult at times, and we'd have less of that connection. And I remember, like, it was bothering me. It was difficult, especially if guests were staying a little bit longer. And so I decided that I should be Rachel, my wife. I should be her guardian angel. Like, God didn't appoint me to that, but I felt like that was going to be a gift to her. And the way I would go about impacting her life, the way I would be shaping and molding and encouraging and challenging, I'd start with the challenge ends of things. But I didn't want to do like you see in the Bible, where it's like the lights and the blindness and do not be afraid. I thought that was a little bit much for this. So I went the more subtle route. That passive-aggressive route. Not too passive, not too aggressive, kind of that nice balance in there. And so she would be heading out the house, because that was part of the difficulty. Like, she'd be out more, and it's like, well, where are you? I'm so used to you being here, and I miss you. But I wouldn't be saying that, because that'd be too direct. And so I figured I would just, as she was leaving, going out again, and you just kind of drop that out there, and then go back to what I'm doing, and message would be received. It's kind of that small voice in her ear. But that didn't seem to work. So I tried other strategies. And one of the other ones was, okay, if I'm not going to say anything, I will non-verbally let her know that I'm unhappy. And you start with the brow, and you give a little bit of this, and if you just kind of look away a little bit. And she was picking up on some of these things. So I think it was working. The thing is, it wasn't quite working in the sense of like drawing us closer together. If anything, it actually pulled us further apart and led to me feeling I was missing her even more. I became more frustrated. And so then I'd move into being a bit critical and poking or even blaming or criticizing in there. And she then was like, well, what's going on? She actually wanted to go out more, and I don't blame her because it wasn't pleasant. That tension was then there for us. And it kind of came to a head one day. I was like, okay, something's got to give. I remember sitting there. I was in one of my grad school classes, and we were talking about couples counseling. I was reading a book on emotion-focused therapy, EFT, and as I was going through it, it said, we go about these things, and we might probe or poke, or we might then shut down, and it doesn't really help bring about connection. So I knew that. It wasn't like big light bulbs went off. But then they guided through a bit of a step of slowing down and, with enough safety in the relationship, make yourself a little more vulnerable. I was like, well, that sounds good. Like that, I mean, that's what I need. I actually want connection with her. I'll try this. So I was a little nervous. I then, how am I going to do this? I need to then put the words together. I need to take a deep breath. I needed courage. And so what I did was I prayed about it and said, hey, God, can you help me? I want to actually engage with her. Part of my fear was there's distance right now. What if I say, hey, I miss you? And she's like, hey, I'm all right. Things are good. I knew she wasn't going to say that, but that's part of what I feared. That would then be the reality. So I prayed into it. God gave me courage for it. And I was like, okay, here's the time. We're going to do this. So I was sitting there in my office, and I could hear her coming up the stairs. I was like, okay, here's the moment. We're about to get into this here. And as she walked in, I had been psyching myself up, not for a fight. I wanted to come in softer. And basically, as I started talking, a bit of tears then came to my eyes. And I basically said, Rach, I miss you. I miss you. It's hard when people come and stay. I feel that distance in our relationship, and I haven't been treating you well. I've been poking at you. I've been criticizing. I've been dismissing you, and I'm sorry. And I know it's not helpful. And as I was doing this, because I didn't come in critically and I was jabbing at her, I was then coming in more softly, and she could see my heart. She could hear my words better. And she then started tearing up, and she's like, I miss you too. And we then reconnected. We hugged, we kissed. It was a beautiful thing. And part of the frustration is it's so simple. Well, why didn't I just do that in the beginning? I mean, that's what was going on. I missed her. But then my system kicked in, and fear then came up, and then I started getting into these patterns and behaviors. And I imagine for you, it can be the same thing. And so I want to help you basically dissect some of those things so that you can recognize it when it's happening and maybe go about it in a bit of a different way. Rachel and I then, from that place, we would then try to engage with those sort of conversations. Let's catch ourselves when we get into a bit of a negative pattern, slow it down, and talk about, okay, what's actually going on inside? What are we intending? What are we needing? What are we wanting? And I can positively say each year we've grown closer and closer, but it's taken a lot of work and a lot of trial and error in there too. And imagine for you, especially with COVID and everything that's going on right now, it can become like a pressure cooker. You're around each other all the time. It's like an Instant Pot. Are you familiar? Small side note, we have an Instant Pot, and I got it because I am the 2018 Village Staff Chili Cook-Off Champion. But yes, anyways, what happens with an Instant Pot is then you then put whatever you have in it, and it marinates. And so, like your relationship, in the midst of COVID, you're marinating your marriage, you're marinating within your house. And if there's goodness in it, awesome. We get to spend more time. We get to then engage and talk and go for walks and do all that. And if there are cracks, if there are wounds, if there's something not good in there, that marinates in it. And it starts to then spoil. It's oh, it tastes like feet. There's something off here. And actually that tension kicks in. And we're going to talk about what are those patterns that kick in when some of that tension's there. But it's part of how we're wired. It was the same for Rachel. When there was a tension around us, it became a tension then between us. And instead of us joining together and actually working it through as a team, as a couple, we would then come at each other and start battling or fighting. And why is that? It's because our relationship matters. It matters. Otherwise, who cares? So-and-so's going out. The person walking down the sidewalk, they're going out again. I don't care, but she is my wife. That is your husband. That is your wife. They matter to you. And so when disconnect comes in, it's actually adaptive that it shows up in our systems, and a bit of an alert goes off, and it's a survival reaction. Why is that? Because we are relational. We are deeply relational. And the beauty is that's part of how God wired us. I mean, ultimately to be in relationship with him, and then also from that place be in relationship with other people. The thing is, culture, especially Western culture, they preach, and we preach, I'll even say, independence. It's like, no, you be strong, independent man. You be a strong, independent woman, which isn't biblical, really. We're not meant to then live on an island. God wired us for that connection, for that relationship. If you look in Scripture in Ecclesiastes 4:12, it says, a person standing alone can be attacked and defeated, but two can stand back to back and conquer. Three are even better than one, for a triple braided cord is not easily broken. And what this emphasizes, it's a healthy interdependence. So not an independence, not an unhealthy dependence, like I am nothing without you, you are my everything, but a healthy interdependence. Because relationships are important and we do need each other. Why do we get married? Companionship. We want to share in life. I want to have somebody I can lean on, and I want somebody who can lean on me so that we can actually be better together. And what we've found is they've done brain scans even down to loneliness, rejection. Like that's something, oh, that's just an emotion. It's not a big deal. No, because those are huge. They're very loneliness, rejection, abandonment. Those are big relational emotions and impact. It actually shows up on our brain as pain. They put people in MRIs and they looked at their brain, and what they found was it's almost as if they're physically getting hurt when loneliness and rejection then come in. Why would God wire us towards that? In order to survive, in order to adapt, in order to build relationships. They did an experiment many years ago, Edward Tronick, and it's called the still face experiment. If you've done Psych 101, you've probably heard about it. And the setup was they had babies, young babies, then sitting in a high chair so they could support themselves, so not newborns. And then they would have the mother sitting across from them. And the mother would then be engaging with them normally, and intentionally, like, ooh, and then goos and gahs and laughter and all this, and the baby would be doing the same sort of thing. I remember I used to bug my brother because he would then, if I told a story, I was like, all of a sudden, he would then do that. We do that. Like that's actually, we've got mirror neurons in our brain wired in to do some of those same activities. And so what they did in the still face experiment was the moms would then be engaging and there'd be all this synergy and attunement and connection between them. And then all of a sudden, the engagement would turn to a cold and then still face. And the mom would just sit there. And it was really interesting to see what the babies did. So once again, they weren't taught anything around this. But what happened inside was the babies would like, ah, and they'd laugh a little bit and ooh, and they'd do all like these different contortions with their face, trying to get some reciprocity, trying to get some engagement and connection from mom. But they weren't finding it because mom was then, she was cold. She was then still. And then for many babies, they'd move into a bit of a protest. And it was like, ah, and they'd throw their heads back and they'd be flopping all around within the chair and they'd be demanding and doing all of that, basically trying to say, wake up, mom. This is painful for me. Where are you going? And the thing is, so that's a baby and that's how we're wired coming into this world. Well, we don't stop being human. As we grow up, we have that same need and that desire, especially for those who are most important to us. In our brain, we then have mirror neurons, as I mentioned. So if I then raise my hand here, and then we were to do a brain scan of you, what we would find is you would have similar patterns. You'd have similar firing in your brain to my raised hand. And not because you're raising your hand, of course, but because we then pick up. There's a reciprocity that happens. And that's where modeling is so powerful. If we can then see or visualize something happening, then we are more likely or more skilled at doing that thing. This goes for emotions too, and this can help with empathy. So if you are then crying or tearing up, it's registering in my brain, and then it can actually facilitate and bring about some sadness. If you're then in a hurt place, or even laughter. Why do they do laugh tracks on television shows? And it's because it feeds in, and we get excited, and we start laughing too, and that's hilarious. Because we then are relational, and we engage. even down to heart rate and breathing. If I were to then really slow my breath down, what would often happen is for you as you sit there, your breath might start slowing. If we hooked you up to a heart rate monitor. But if I then all of a sudden started panicking and, okay, what's going on here? What should I do? What's happening? And I just kept going with this. And I did this for about 20 seconds and we hooked you up. All of a sudden your heart rate would start going. It would start coming up to about the level that I'm at. And we start mimicking each other in that. We are tuned in. We are wired for connection. So let's see what this looks like. So I realize we're doing a little brain science here, but it's really important, trust me in this, because this is often the fuel for what takes us into disconnection patterns and cycles. But if we can understand it, then we can tame it a little bit better and learn to work with it. So if we have a quick look at our brain here, oversimplification, but there are essentially three parts that we have. We have the neocortex, the rational, logical, planning center of the brain. This is where reason and reflection come in. This is something that in teenagers, or in all humans, doesn't fully develop until you're about 25, which kind of explains some things at times. Hopefully there's no 19, 20, well, yeah, no, I hope there's 19, 21-year-olds, but you'll get there. It'll happen when you're 25. But we're not fully formed in that regard. And this is the place where, what's that movie? Inside Out. It's like they're sitting there and there's this mission control center and emotions are then coming up and they're trying to direct things, but it really comes down to then that neocortex piece, that what are we going to choose to do in the midst of this? And when we're functioning well, that's awesome. We've got that. And then we've got our emotions, which is part of the limbic system. And this is where a fear response, the amygdala is in there. Other emotions then come in there too. And this can actually add some of the spice, the flavor to life. This is a lot of times when we say, oh, I love you. It's because there's an emotion. Like we are feeling something. There's a pleasantness to it. And then it also shows up in our body too, like physically, like there's a warmth. There's a movement then within here. And then if you go one step deeper, then you're down at the brainstem. And this is where you have the vagus nerve in there. And this is where we get activated. And this is a practical, functional, definitely a survival part of our system. So we have our autonomic nervous system, our sympathetic nervous system, and our parasympathetic nervous system. So when we get into fight mode or even kind of flight mode at times, we then get activated, sympathetic nervous system. When we're panicking, shortness of breath, we are then emoting. We are getting overwhelmed. We are getting dysregulated. And it's adaptive at times. Like if there's then a car to be picked up, like it's on somebody's foot, you'll hear those crazy stories. Sympathetic nervous system then going in and lifting it up, and that person then is actually able to be safe. And how did you do that? I just did it. It's also the same part that it bypasses then our neocortex, our rational thinking part. So imagine you're in your kitchen, I was doing eggs and sausages then today. And then let's say I turned around to talk to somebody and then I rested my elbow down. And let's say our vagus nerve wasn't there. All we had was this and our sense of smell and even sound. What we'd have to do is then I'd be sitting there and, what is that? Is that flesh? Is that burning flesh? There's a bit of a warmth through here. Whoa, I should probably move myself back from there. No, it's not adaptive. That's you touch it and it's like, whoa, what happened? I didn't have time for it to go up here and make a rational, logical decision about what we're doing. It's fight, flight, and even sometimes on the vagus nerve end, it's freeze. And so we get primed. Like think about your history, the history of relationships, the household that you grew up in. Who would you go to for comfort? Was there a safety there? That can prime us, that this world is more of a safe place. What would they be doing? What would they be saying? How would they be caring for us? We can get primed for that. And it actually can lead us to then reach out a little bit more, have a little more courage to do that. Imagine if you then were in a household where, on the other end, it was traumatic, it was abusive, it was neglectful. We also get primed towards that. And then there's everything in between. We all have triggers. We all have things that we can get activated by. And we get primed to them. And it makes sense. We start to notice things in the environment. And that's adaptive. Because if we didn't, every day would be a new day and we'd just be shocked that the same thing's happening over and over. But no, we start to tune in. Like you see this in the everyday. I think it was about 9 years ago. We had a Chevy Tahoe. It was great, but then the engine, it just like died. I think it was the transmission went and it was older. We had to replace it. So we started looking for minivans. At that time, we just had the 2 oldest kids. And we were just trying to figure out, no, I think we had 3 kids. We were trying to figure out, what do we do? I mean, we can fit in a car, but I think we might actually need something a little more versatile. So we had the minivan talk. Initially, I was reluctant, but my wife convinced me. And I'm a converted believer of minivans nowadays. So they are so functional and practical. You push the button, the doors slide open. You don't have to worry about the kids doof, 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 basically having to leave notes on everybody else's car, or all of a sudden, what are you doing? So I like minivans now. But it was such a process for us then finding it. And what I noticed was, being then back out, this is Southern California, we're out on the highway, cars everywhere, no matter what time of day or night. And what would I notice? Minivans. There were no more minivans on the road that I'm aware of than there were before, but a priming had started to come in. And I would notice minivans in general. And then as we started honing in, I think I like those Toyota Siennas. Maybe we should get one of those. All of a sudden, the Toyotas we'd notice. And then the actual down to the models, like those SEs, those are even nice. And then we'd notice all those. We started to fine tune. The environment hadn't changed, but what we started to tune into changed. And it's adaptive. It helps us survive our systems or our dynamics, the family systems that we're in. And so what can happen is, if we're then primed for, there's not enough safety here, how's this going to go? Are they going to be there for me? We can start to get activated on that lower level, like that survival level, where, I'm starting to hear a little bit of a tone or tension starting to come in. So whether we have trauma history or not, we then can notice disconnect, and we then get simple. We're not necessarily going up to here where, like I said with the example in California, no, I know she loves me and she does want to be with me. It's just she has, other things that she's wanting to do, and it makes sense, and it's totally logical. But when the disconnect was in there, the risk is we get emotional, and then we even get down to this place, and we can move into that fight or flight mode or even freeze mode. And then we get binary. We get friend or foe, and that's adaptive. Do I need to protect, or do I need to then fight back? And if you're then friend or foe, who's the person right in front of you? It's your spouse. Like right now, it feels like you're the enemy. And so we then get primed to that. Like think about a startle response. If I, all of a sudden then jumped out, imagine you then jumped there. I didn't scream, I didn't want to blow your ears out. But I imagine then there was a bit of a startle there. Let's get rational. I'm in another room. You are looking at me on a screen. I am not going to come and attack you. However, your system didn't necessarily know that. Startle response is basically saying, react. I need to react right now. So we all do that. It's a healthy thing within us. It's just sometimes it shows up in ways that aren't logical, aren't helpful, and we need to learn how to manage that. So even mild tension can be seen as danger. And when that happens, we start shutting down from the top down. So we're not as logical or rational anymore. We become quite emotional, and we move into that friend or foe, flight or flight. We're dumber. We get dumber in those moments. I'll sit with couples, and a lot of times we'll say, okay, how have things been since we last met? Anything come up? And, this happened. Well, tell me about it. Let's slow it down and understand what might have been going on behind it, which we're doing tonight. And you can often then see this embarrassment in their face, I was kind of saying or doing stuff that, do we have to actually talk about it? No, you are. No, you are. We do dumb stuff, right? But to a certain extent, and no excuses, but we can't help it sometimes. We're not online. We're not working with all the information. We kick into that panic mode. And when that happens, we get into stereotypical ways of responding. So one of these categories, and I'm going to lay out 2 for you, are pursuing behaviors. This tends to be more of that fight mode that we kick into. So small side note, hopefully if you've got a notepad next to you or your phone, you can take pictures of stuff just to remember them. But it's important to recognize the behaviors, to recognize when they show up, because maybe then we can see them in advance and or do something different. So let's go through these. So when fight kicks in for some of us, some go to flight or freeze, but for those of us who go to fight, we're probing, questioning, accusing, clinging, nagging, blaming, criticizing, I have to watch that. I have to be careful because I can move into that. Controlling, complaining, interrogating. Like, yeah, we're going to talk about this. Let's do this right now. Are we ever going to talk about this? What about this? What are you thinking? What's happening for you right now? There can be this intensity that comes. Yelling, judging, putting the other down, picking arguments, following around the house. Sound familiar? Yeah, I think in the early days for me, I would, wait, we need to talk. Where are you going? You can run, but you can't hide. Here we go. We're going to talk. Phoning or texting repeatedly. So here, as you're watching this, I'm trying to bring unity. So none of this stuff or, oh, that's totally you. Let's take some ownership. Own, this may be you. And if you're finding that I don't know how many are on here, 16, let's say. If you're doing 12 of 16, it doesn't mean you're really messed up. It means we all do these things. But what it means is that you're probably more of a pursuer. When disconnect comes in, you move into pursuing more readily. Okay? What's happening? What are pursuers doing? They're fighting for the relationship. But once again, not necessarily rationally or logically, they're reacting. They're fighting for it. They're just not going about it in a way that's helpful. I can probe, I can criticize. I thought I was actually fighting for our marriage. I thought this is, I'm doing this. I miss you, so then let's bring us back together here. Yet it decreased safety then for Rachel and resulted in her then pulling away. And I hear this time and time again with the couples that I sit with. The other category is then withdrawing behaviors. So this is where we can move into defending, reasoning. It's kind of like, hey, let's think about this rationally. Giving advice, this is often the fix-it thing. Yeah, what about this? Well, why don't you try this? Why don't you just, I don't need that from you right now. But they're trying to fix it using humor, a little joke. It's a way to pull up out of the intensity or the emotion. Dismissing, avoiding, deflecting, clamming up, not responding, shutting down, appeasing, placating, smoothing things over, counter-blaming, yelling to shut things down. Enough! So withdrawers aren't necessarily quiet. Sometimes they are, and that's when they're in that shutdown mode or numbing out, clamming up. But oftentimes it's just I'm trying to keep this from getting out of hand here. Minimizing the problem, leaving the room, that can be a big thing, numbing out. And so oftentimes withdrawers, if this is you, but just even acknowledge that, yep, I think that's me. A lot of these show up for me, I notice that, own it. If that's you, oftentimes what you're probably trying to do is bring things down, stop the fight. Basically, I don't want things to get worse. Let's snuff out the conflict fire. Let's do that. But sadly, it often feeds the fire. The very intention, let's bring this down, actually often makes things worse. So what do you do from this list? Actually, take a second. So you guys have seen these. You're looking at these right now. I'll jump back for a second. Look at the pursuing behaviors. Own your steps. Okay, when disconnect or when fights happen, I find myself moving into, let's say it's criticizing. Let's say it's nagging. And if your spouse is actually telling you these things, don't say, yeah, you do, but you also, those are fighting words. We're trying not to fight. We're trying to be heard and understood, to work with calming our system. And then back to withdrawing behaviors. What do you notice yourself doing? So oftentimes we gravitate to one over the other, but we can then move from one to another depending on the topic, the issue, length of time in the relationship, frustration, all sorts of things. The thing is, oftentimes we might even think we're right. This is what we need to do. I'm shutting down because if we don't, it's going to get out of hand. And that's the right thing to do. Partially, but it's not actually bringing about understanding and connection. If anything, it might be amping up your partner. Or let's talk about this, because if we don't talk about it, how are we actually going to repair this and learn and reconnect? Well, okay, sort of right. But also, how are you doing that? And are you making it safe then for your spouse to enter in and actually hear you better? And so what can happen is we move into different combinations of these different communication cycles that come up. They're patterns that feed off of each other. So let's say you have two pursuers that come together. This is often let's find the bad guy. We can trigger each other. One person says this, the next person does, and then it just amps up. Because we then are offline up here, and we're online here, and we're just going at it. These are the neighbors that you don't want to have. Like it's loud, there's a lot going on. Not all pursuers is it super loud, but there is an intensity, there's a coming, there can be a questioning and interrogating, a poking that actually comes with that. Difficulty here is a lot is said. Like especially the more escalated and the dumber we get, then things are put on the table and look, I didn't mean that. But we know like there must be some truth in that. Where'd that come from otherwise? Normally you'd filter that out, but you didn't this time. And if both people are doing that, that damage is done. And then that safety becomes much less, which actually increases the chances of getting into the same pattern. The next pattern or combination is the pursue withdraw. And this is kind of by far the majority of couples then fit into this. We all do at different points in time or different conversations. And the pursue withdraw, one way of looking at this, it's almost like the tortoise and the hare. So the tortoise, they're just chilling. They're going about life. Their head's out of the shell. They're looking around. They're just loving it. It's good. And maybe disconnect comes in, and so they're on a bit of alert. The hare, the rabbit, is then, they're bouncing around. Things are then good. What's going on? Ooh, disconnect came in. Oh, well, we got to deal with this. So then they run up to the tortoise, and what do? They start banging on that shell. The tortoise is there, and here's a bang. Doof, doof, doof. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Okay, what's going on? And they start then going inside. And the hare's on the outside like, what? I know you're in there. What are you doing? Like, get back. Doof, doof, doof. And that's all that the tortoise hears on the inside. Just the bang, bang, bang. And what's happening in their system? Unsafe, unsafe, unsafe. Not coming out. And the hare's like, I'm panicking right now. What's going on? Bam, 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 bam. And they're both then left feeling incredibly disconnected, feeling alone. It doesn't work. And then the last one is withdraw, withdraw. Because sometimes what can happen is you either have two pursuers or a pursuer and a withdrawer, and the pursuer then gets tired. And they start giving up. We call them tired pursuers, where why bother? I know where this takes us. I feel so stuck in the relationship, and why? Let's just not do this right now. And they start shutting down, and they start pulling back. It can be quite discouraging if this is all we've got. Like, all right, that was a good Tuesday Night Live. There, you know what you do. You're stuck. There we go. But no, there's hope. There's hope. So what can we do? We start by restoring safety. That's big. If we're working with our system, we're going into friend or foe. We're either fighting or we're fleeing or freezing, where we shut down, overwhelm, numbing out, and it's not safe. That tortoise is not coming out of that shell unless it's safe to do so. That hare often isn't going to stop panicking unless there's some engagement, unless it's a little safer in the environment. Like we're okay, right? And so we start with owning our steps. And that's hey, we are doing the pursue, withdraw thing, the pursue, the find the bad guy, the tortoise and the hare, whatever you want to call it. Actually, a lot of times couples will name their cycle, the vortex. And so when it shows up, we can say, hey, we've been learning about this. And this is where I don't want this to just be a night where, oh, that was all right. Yeah, we got to sit down and we were sharing in a show together or something different. Like, I actually want this to impact your marriage. That's why we're doing this, right? We want this to go into tomorrow and the next day and the next day. And even, can I be as grand as to say, to your children, as you are then modeling this to them and you come alongside them, or maybe you're mentoring other couples. I want this to land for you. So if we can start to see our steps of what's going on, yeah, these are the behaviors I have to watch out for in myself. These are the behaviors that my spouse has to watch out for. When they show up, like we start priming to that. Like, oh, no, oh, we're moving into that. We are moving into that. That's a big difference. Because oftentimes what happens is, oh, you're now criticizing. Oh, well, you're shutting down. And it's like we're getting our sword out and then getting our shield out and we're doing this. We're not hearing each other. We're not actually re-engaging in that. But the we, it's like we're coming to the table together. And we come alongside each other, and then the pattern, the cycle becomes the enemy. It's like, this isn't working for us. It's basically saying, I don't want to fight with you. I really don't. Well, neither do I. All right, we can actually join in that. Let's slow things down a little bit then. And so sometimes what we need to do is, and not for everybody, but a lot of couples need to take a timeout. Like, timeouts aren't just for little kids. You don't go sit on the naughty step. No, it's something that actually helps regulate our system. And so what we need to do is, if we're then activated and we're going into our pursuing or withdrawing behaviors, then we need to somehow step away from the catalyst of that. And ideally, we're then saying, hey, we're doing that whole dance thing, that cycle thing, that pattern thing, whatever is the shared language that you have. we're doing that. I don't want to do that with you. Can we come back to this? So if you need a timeout, then what you're doing is you're asking to take a step back. Like, I need a few minutes to cool down and then I'll come back. That would be ideal. Sometimes we're so activated we can't put the words together. But when we're in a right state of mind, can we agree that if we need a timeout, can that be okay? But here's the huge thing, and I'll get to this in a second. You have to actually come back. Like, you have to actually return. Otherwise, you just feed right back into the cycle again. And so, hey, this is important. I need a few minutes to cool down. Can we come back to this? And then you step away. And what are you doing? And this is the whole, what do we tell people when they're activated, when they're panicking or they're freaking out? Calm down. Yeah, well, we can then do that. That doesn't help here. That's like fuel to the fire. Get another sword out. It's then calming ourselves down by breathing. Take a deep breath. We actually start to soothe. We start to come down a little bit. And what happens is, then our top starts to come back on. We've flipped our lid. It's starting to re-engage a little bit more. The emotions then aren't flooding as much from our limbic system. And down then our brainstem and our vagus nerve, it's, okay, we've restored some peace. There is some calm. Then we can start to then think about what happened there, what's going on. And I strongly recommend pray. So take your deep breaths and pray. Just, hey, God, I need you. I need you to actually help soothe and calm my system, my body. And I'd strongly recommend pray for the fruit of the Spirit. Like, beautiful. Love. Yeah, could use a little more love. Joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control, goodness. Like, these are all these things that they're super relational. And Scripture says that how much more will your Father in heaven give you the Holy Spirit if you ask for it? Like, I need this. I need gentleness right now. I need some self-control. Because right now, I just feel like running out there and grabbing my sword. I just feel like just leaving, getting out and bunkering down, protecting myself. But I know I don't really want that. So take those deep breaths. Okay, God, I need you to calm me, to soothe me. And then you're going to think about, okay, what am I actually wanting? And then you come back, you re-engage, which is really important, as I was saying a minute ago. Because here's the risk. Let's take a pursue withdraw. The withdrawers, who typically love timeouts, like, you hear that, honey? He said we could take a timeout. And if I'm the withdrawer, I'd be like, yes, if you then come back. And don't start fighting about that. But what happens then? Imagine if we call a timeout and there's no return. What goes on for the pursuer? We're not going to deal with this. And then they get back into that activated mode, and it's like, well, then I'm going to have to follow you around, or I'm going to have to light up your phone. Hey, are we ever going to talk about this? What's going on? Do not disturb. Like, we get into that. That's the pattern. So, withdrawer, care for your spouse, care for yourself, care for your relationship by actually re-engaging. It'll give, a lot of times withdrawers, it's like, I need time to think right now. I can't do this in the moment. You're then saying this and asking that, and I just can't keep up. It's overwhelming for me, so I need to disengage. Okay, well, can we allow that space for it? And every time you return from a timeout, and you don't have to have it all figured out, you're just coming back in a more calm state saying, hey, what was going on? How do we do this? How do we do this different? Every time you do that, you're building trust, you're building connection, you're building safety then with your spouse. So that, and this is, I can say this for my marriage, I can say this for many of the couples I've met with. I've even then heard pursuers say, wait, do we need a timeout right now? Like, what? Who are you? Because that was the last thing I would have said, or that was the last thing that oftentimes the pursuers would say. But they then know, I want you. Like, I want you at your best. I want all of this in line. I want to be able to hear you, understand, and engage with you so that we can repair and bring things down. And because we keep coming back to these conversations when we're in a better place, I want that. So when the cycle shows up, it's like, oh, hey, we're doing that right now. Should we take a step back? Yeah. And then the withdrawer has a bit of peace to then think things through. Pursuer can cool down as well. And then they re-engage, and we're actually better and less dumb in coming back. And the likelihood of repair becomes that much greater. There's research by John Gottman out of the Gottman Institute, and they've done some fascinating research where they hook people up to heart rate monitors and sweat and just even noticing what goes on for them. And what they have found, and this is a crazy stat, that how you enter into a conversation, so whether you come in softly, whether you come in harshly, 96% of the time, if you come in softly for the first 3 minutes, then it will go in a more connected direction. However, 96% of the time, if you come in harshly for 3 minutes, sometimes it's even less than that, you're going to head in a disconnected direction. That's a lot of power, 96%. But here's the hard part. It's 3 minutes. It's not 3 seconds or 30 seconds. If it's 3 seconds, then we'd actually come back to the beginning of the night and be like, you know what? Listen to this very carefully. Get your game face on. 3 seconds, come in softly, and 96% of the time, you're going to be fully engaged, connected, beautiful. But it doesn't work that way. Why is it 3 minutes? Because under the surface, we're going, are you here to fight or are you here to be a friend? And so even, let's say the pursuer's poking and the withdrawer can engage and be soft in that and do that for 3 minutes, then oftentimes the pursuer's like, okay, now I'm just a bully. I'm then going to put this down. I want to engage. Or the other way around. The pursuer comes in softly and doing that for 3 minutes. Like, whoa, this is different. Like, this is okay. I'm actually hearing you. We can engage. We can do this better. 96% of the time. And then what we can do as we re-engage, they talk about like a 20-second hug or a 7-second kiss. So one of the other beautiful ways God has wired us is bonding, oxytocin. Beautiful chemical that actually helps bring about connection in us. So moms, as they nurse their babies, oxytocin's then released, and it helps then bond. Sex, orgasm, the release of oxytocin is then pretty significant. A 20-second hug, a 7-second kiss releases oxytocin. Like I've heard couples say, oh, let's hug it out, let's do it, which works for many. Some it doesn't. Some people, like touch can be loaded for some people, but maybe you can work towards that. Hey, are you in a place, like the permission thing, like hug and coming in softly and then actually engaging. My wife and I sometimes will joke where it's like 17, 18, 19, there we go. And just disconnect in that way, use a little humor in there. But we want that oxytocin because what it does is it soothes. It works with our parasympathetic nervous system to then soothe. And it works against the sympathetic nervous system that's activating there. And it then calms. And then what do? We move into slowing down and going down into it. So if we've taken a step back, or maybe we've been able to calm down, we're engaging then softly, and we start to own our steps. This is where we try to make it make sense. Unless you married a psychopath, they're probably not trying to hurt you. They're not trying to come after you. And if you did, please reach out, counseling@thisisvillagechurch.com. But generally speaking, we don't do that. Like we're not coming out trying to upset each other, trying to cause pain, but that doesn't mean that we don't cause pain. And we do have to be accountable for that. Like if you're in an unsafe relationship, I'm being serious, let us know. But that's often not what's then going on under the surface. That's not what's going on in the heart. That's often not the intentions. We're typically pretty benevolent. Otherwise, what are we doing? Why did we get married? And so what we do is we own our steps. So when you this, I that, and these are these behaviors, then you this, and so on and so on. We start then feeding off each other. So it could be when you criticize or attack, I defend or shut down. Then you criticize or attack, and I shut down even more. And what we're doing is we're pairing that the behaviors I do and the behaviors you do have an impact on each other that leads into that cycle that leads to disconnect and often further damage then happening. So by coming in softly and owning our steps, hey, I'm realizing that, like I was talking about with Rachel in California, that I'm being critical, I'm being passive aggressive, and I imagine that's frustrating and hurtful for you. I'm sorry for that. Are those fighting words? No. I'm exposing then my heart. I'm making myself vulnerable, and I'm offering up, here's what I'm doing, and here's what I'm seeing. And it looks like you're wanting to leave even more so or withdraw even more so. And as we own those things and not doing it in a blaming tone, well, the more you shut down, well, of course, I'm going to be criticizing. Those are fighting words. The more we can then approach this with softness. And then what we're going to do is ask what's going on for them. The safety starts to come in, and we come with curiosity. Curiosity, like if we could sprinkle something on your marriage that would make a significant difference, it'd be that. Part of that wiring in us, that priming that we tune in, there's so much information going on in the world, and we can't take it all in. It's tiring. It's tiring. Actually, like with COVID and everything that's going on, I imagine you felt quite tired. Why? There's been so much change. So much is then different, and the stress that comes with it. We then have to tune in even more so to this because it's, wait, I don't necessarily have a pathway for this. I don't have a shortcut. It's not like riding a bike that I've done over and over. This is COVID. This is new. How do we do this? How do we navigate it? It's tiring, right? And so what happens is we get lazy and we try to work efficiently and we make quick judgments. Oh, friend, foe. Oh, you're this, you're that. We put people in boxes. So then we don't have to think about it. Because living in the gray, in that curious space of, what might be going on for her? Or even curious space for ourselves. Like, what might be going on for me right now? What's happening inside? That's actually a place where we can find connection, we can find understanding, and we can find connection. So what do you need to do? You show up and you shut up. Like you might ask a question, what was going on for you? But then you shut up, like you actually listen. It's a beautiful thing. Sometimes we'll do very practical exercises with couples where it's your job is just to listen. You'll actually have a notepad out. And I don't do this, but sometimes it'd be helpful. Like tape over your lip because then you can't say anything. And what happens is the other person starts to feel heard. They're not out of a pressure place trying to, yeah, but this, and put this piece out on the table and that piece. What you're doing is you're sitting across the table and you're then saying, hey, what was going on for you? I've owned my steps, I'm doing this, and what was happening for you? And then the other person can start talking without interruption, and you're there to hear and understand. I was so hurt, I was so afraid. I thought that you didn't care, I thought that I didn't matter to you. Those pieces start to come out. And then what often happens is, like it's almost like this, and we're not childish often, but it's almost like we go in and it's like we have our ears plugged, and it's not until we feel heard or understood that it becomes easier to then say, oh, and what about you? What's happening? Here's the hard part. You've got two people coming to the table and they're both doing this and we're both trying to talk, but nobody's getting heard. There's greater frustration. It doesn't work. So I challenge you, take the lead, like actually come in and say, hey, what was happening for you? And what are you saying in your head? Soft, 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 listen, listen, shut up, shut up, shut up. Not out loud, do not say that out loud. But inside voices, right? And you're then listening, you're trying to then take in the information. And a beautiful thing that's so foundational, what's happening? What are you gifting your spouse? They're seen, they're heard, they're understood, what they're saying matters. So much is said by you shutting up, like believe it or not. And then re-engage when they're ready. Hopefully then in a perfect world, which we don't live in, but ideally then your spouse can say, and what about you? What was happening for you? And then you've got that space and you're engaging as well. Okay. So what I want to do is I want to talk about what goes on underneath the surface. So, hey, what was happening for you? That very question. Well, what do I say? What's going on? I want to give you a bit of a framework, some constructs for that. So what we have and what we did was we talked about the behaviors. You've got your pursuing behaviors, you've got your withdrawing behaviors, know your steps. What do I do? And even a bit of the pattern of what happens. And then we come down to that next level of our thoughts, our perceptions. This is our understanding of the situation. We're meaning makers. We're understanding somebody going, somebody engaging, somebody saying this, saying it in that way. We're then making those judgments often without curiosity, and we are then interpreting them. And that can be anything from perceptions or thoughts about ourselves. How much do I matter to them? Do they care about me? Do my needs matter to them? Thoughts about others, like, are we going to engage? Are people going to be there for me? Am I on my own in this? Like, we then go to that place. And imagine if the thoughts are, I don't matter and you're not going to be there for me. Well, then that would show up then on that next level of that heart level, that emotion level of panic then kicks in, or sadness or frustration. This is then figuratively, it's where our hearts are. This is what fuels that connection. It fuels that disconnection as well. And so we need to learn to be a little more versed in going down to this emotion level. That's why I stretched it out a little bit in that diamond. Usually if we can hear and understand on this level, then the likelihood of us reconnecting and even understanding what's going on for our spouse increases. Like it often makes sense. Oh, you thought that I didn't care, or you thought I was dismissing you, and oh, well, not to excuse it, but it makes sense then that you would then amp up, or that you would actually shut down in there. I didn't realize that. Or if we can go down to that place of our fears, like our triggers, our raw spots, the fears that come up in there, this can actually help us connect. I'm not, and you shouldn't, walk down the sidewalk and just say, you know what I'm most afraid of in relationships or in life? Like, don't do that. We don't do that. Why is that? It's vulnerable. I'm not going to expose my fears to somebody who's unsafe. But if we can slow down in that softness, in that gentleness, with curiosity, hey, what's going on for you? Like, so what was going through your head? What were you thinking? Not what was going through your head. What were you thinking? What was going through your head? But then moving down to, and what was that like for you? And then to start sharing some of the fears. Like, I was afraid that you weren't going to be there for me. I was afraid, like, it felt like you didn't love me. And what happens there as that softness comes in? We can actually start connecting. We can start engaging even more so. Because unless we are then a bully, if somebody then slows down and they are soft, and they're then saying, hey, here's what was going on for me. And it takes an incredible amount of courage. I'm like, yeah, it takes a real man, a real woman to actually go down into vulnerability. I mean that. In many ways, it's easier to just lock it down. We don't do this. Let's just hang out up here. No, there we go. Like, I'm being serious. It's a big deal to go down there. And that's the very place, though, that we actually start to connect and find each other. I mean, that shows up in our relationship with Jesus, too. Like, I want him in my heart. I want to engage with him. I want to reach out to him in that way. And that's it. Like, he wants my whole heart. Like, what? Why don't you my whole head? He does, transformed by the renewing of your mind, but he also then wants our heart. Like, it's deep, it's personal, it's vulnerable. It's beautiful, actually, if we can then find that connection there. And then if we go down to one more level, we then get down to our needs. So it's almost like you're scuba diving down, and this is the treasure. And in some ways, the treasure down here, it's the basics. Like, it gets really simple. Like, two of the big things that we're asking in relationships are, do I matter to you? And if I reach for you, are you going to be there for me? Do I matter to you? If I reach for you, are you going to be there for me? And if the answer to those is a resounding yes, awesome. Peace, connection, great. Fights just become less, minimal, quiet, volume down, or just even not happening. To where, let's say the answer to these that, do I matter to you? If I reach for you, are you going to be there for me? Is no. Then that plate on a counter, that visa expenditure, whatever that might be, that missed task, like, oh, you didn't pick up milk. If we're not good, and I'm questioning whether I matter to you, now this is an indicator of dropping down to this level. And you know what? I'm angry, I'm hurt, I'm afraid. There's a whole host of stuff. I feel so lonely and disconnected in this. But if we can then work on building that foundation of, I want my spouse to know that they matter to me. And I want them to know that they can trust me. If they reach for me, I'm going to be there. You show up. You show up. That is so powerful. I think it was Brene Brown was talking about, she did a lot of research on trust. And what she found was, it was the people who showed up for stuff that felt the most trust for somebody else. They were there for me. They showed up at the funeral. They called me when this happened. They were just there. They were by my side. Like, that's how you build trust. You're there. You show up. It's powerful. And so we want the answer to these questions to be a resounding yes then for you. And that's what happens on this deep level. And then how this actually plays out, it looks different person by person. But it does get simple in the sense of, like, sometimes love languages come in here. If I'm working with a couple, or if I'm engaging then with Rachel around this, then it's, yeah, what do you need right now? Or sometimes it's, I'll see one of the partners then reach out and put their hand on the other's leg. They're not saying much, but they're saying so much. 1, I'm not here to fight. 2, you matter to me. 3, I'm here for you. And let's figure this out together. And what happens, our system starts to get soothed and come down in that. And sometimes it's, I love you. You matter to me. Like, you're important to me. The words of affirmation type stuff. Just spending time, touch, all those pieces can be powerful. So what often happens under the surface as we look at these, the behaviors, the thoughts, the emotions, the needs, pursuers, and note this, especially the ones that connect, make a little note, because these are important to share with your spouse, because we want to get to know each other. That's the big thing. That's how we build friendship, build understanding. It's how we work better together. It's like you get to know the tool or the machine. And so pursuers, often what's going on under the surface, they want to work on the relationship. We're never going to talk about this. Some of the thoughts that go on, we're never going to talk about this. I'm on my own in this. I feel like I'm the only one fighting for this. Sometimes they worry that they're too much. Like, yeah, I know I get emotional and I feel like I'm too much and I'm going to push him away or her away. They feel anxious and fearful about losing you. Fear rejection or abandonment. So hear these. If your spouse is then a pursuer, really take these in. Feel overwhelmed inside. And what's happening on that deeper level? Oftentimes, they need your engagement. They need you to be accessible. They need you to respond. They need you to engage, to be present, because that tells them, I'm here. It's okay. I'm not here to fight. I'm with you in this. And it helps bring things down. And it starts to answer some of those questions that show up in the thoughts of they're not going to be there for me. Well, what happens when we actually engage? We're there for them. So that fear we can now douse. We can put it down and off to the side. They need your support, your reassurance. They need your soothing. So any of these fit for you pursuers? Like even take a second, if any of those, and just share that with your spouse there. And if you're sitting there and your spouse isn't there, just even take note of that. What about then for withdrawers? The relationship matters to them too, which for some pursuers, if you're married to a withdrawer, that might even be a bit of a surprise to you. Because sometimes it can feel like, it's almost like the tortoise in the shell, like you don't even care. You're just trying to get away from all of this. Is there anything going on inside? Like those are, but no, withdrawers care about the relationship too. It matters. And oftentimes they're pulling back from their emotions. It can feel like they're pulling back from you and the relationship, but they're actually often pulling back from the emotions of that moment. Like it's interesting, the research shows that withdrawers get just as activated, just as dysregulated, if not more, than pursuers. But oftentimes you wouldn't see that. It seems cold, it seems disconnected. But for withdrawers, like not if this fits for you, but you've got stuff going on inside, whether you've got it figured out, whether it's panic or not, but you've got stuff going on inside. And what's going through their head oftentimes, I don't know how to fix this. I don't want to rock the boat. Let's kind of keep the peace here. Sometimes my needs don't matter. I hear your needs because you're putting them out on the table. My needs must not matter then. So why would I speak up? They may be afraid that you'll get fed up and leave. Often they don't know what they're feeling. It's just something's happening. I know that, but I don't necessarily know what it is. Maybe they didn't grow up going down to this level. It's foreign to them. Well, that's going to be really hard for them to organize it, the whole name it to tame it, to be able to work with it. Well, I don't even have words because I don't know what's going on for me. It can be really hard for them. Desperately want peace or calm. I hear that time and time again as I slow things down and go down with withdrawers. I want things to be okay. And so it's like they're the fire's going, it's like they're putting water on it. But then the pursuer is like, what? You're dousing our connection, our fire. And they throw the gas on it. But the withdrawer is just like, I'm trying to keep this at bay. And it's not that I don't want passion or connection. I do want connection. I just don't want it to get out. I don't want to get flooded. I don't want to get overwhelmed. I don't want to get stuck. And often then there's feelings of sadness and even loneliness and feel disconnected. Imagine that tortoise in the shell. They're in the middle and they feel like they're all by themselves and all they hear is the banging on the outside. What withdrawers often need on that lowest level, your love, your understanding, that's big. Patience. Patience is huge. If they don't know how to talk about their emotions, if they can't think on the spot like that, you pushing them is going to make it that much harder for them. But then they're needing your patience. They need your reassurance. They need to feel safe enough to engage, which sometimes, as we talked about with timeouts, involves space. Like I actually need space right now. And it's not space from I just need to get away from the marriage or the relationship. Sometimes in a panic that might go to that place or feel that way. But oftentimes it's I need to bring things down. I need to restore peace in some sort of way. And withdrawing is the only way I know how to do that. So if these then fit for you, I encourage you, share that with your spouse or even write that down to come back to later. Like, hey, remember when Josh was talking about that? Yeah. That is what's going on. Or pursuers, you could even then say, or withdrawer to withdrawer as well, just, hey, you know when Josh was talking about a little bit of what's going on under the surface? Any of that fit for you? Like, is that? And you might then now drop down into a real connecting, bonding moment and conversation. So when we hear these things, what's going on under the surface, oftentimes we can re-engage better. Like it's interesting, I didn't intentionally do this, but as I'm talking about these, like there's a softness that even comes in how I'm talking about them. Why? Because we're not up in the fighting or the shutting down in the cold and the distant. We're opening up. There's actually room for bonding and connection to happen. It's like we're re-engaging with that baby. The still face is gone. There's actual engagement. There's a soothing that comes with it. And it becomes safer to connect because we can hear the heart. We can see the heart. And it's worth fighting to get there. Not always easy, but worth fighting to get there, not fighting each other. And these conversations, these repair conversations, they can help you learn. They can help you then build understanding, build safety, build connection. And the good news is, emotional connection, that's enough. But then one of the beautiful things about marriage is sexual connection. The better the connection, the better the sex. A lot of research around that the more then safety there is, the more emotional engagement and connection, the more freedom that shows up in sex. The more freedom to play, to enjoy, to be present, to engage. Like there's more of a releasing that happens. And sex, it's an incredible thing that God gave us. He gave it to us for our pleasure. Like, think about this. God could have made us purely functional. Like you interlock fingers and then all of a sudden babies are made. And I'm so thankful that he didn't. Like, imagine how painful high fives would be. I don't think it works that way, but I'm so thankful that he didn't then make us in that way, that we have sex organs. We've got erogenous zones in our body. It's for loving. Like, that's incredible. God would do that for us because our pleasure does matter. And he wants that then for us. And so he even then wired us with sex drives. Like we have drives within us to draw us further to our spouse. And oftentimes you hear that men tend to have a stronger sexual drive because it can be easier for us to then shift into the mindset of sex, which is true. It's like squirrel, sex, but like boom, in a moment, all of a sudden then in that, there isn't often this heating up, this warming up. It's just like, did I hear sex? Yeah? Okay, let's do this. Let's go. And another comparison for that would then be, it's like men are like light switches, just one flick and they're on. Women are like NASA mission control. And I realize these are stereotypes, doesn't fit for everybody, but it's like I have to turn this dial and that and this back, and then all of a sudden, are we good? Systems go? Do you get that light bulb going? Or men have a waffle brain. They can go into the sex box, so to speak, and it's like, yeah, is that what we're doing? Yeah, sex right now? All right, good. Whereas women are often more, they say spaghetti brain. And it's like, well, this is connected to this or that, and I'm thinking about this right now, so I'm not necessarily fully present with this, and what about that? And we have to go there. Or even men are like a microwave. You just push one button and heats right up. Women are like a crock pot or an Instant Pot where it's got to simmer, it's got to marinate, it's got to warm up and then come together in that. And so when women have mental space cleared to prepare for sex and be more present, their drive actually can be just as high as men's. So that can be a myth. And I meet with many couples where it's then reversed. There isn't a way that it's supposed to be. And I think even culture speaks into that too. Men often are then given this freedom to, and especially secular culture, go express yourself, go conquer the world sexually in that way. And so it's then celebrated in that regard. Whereas often women's, it's like there's this incredible modesty then in there, and we don't talk about this. Or even sometimes church, we have to be careful too. It's sex is a no, and then go. Like once you're married, it's like, well, wait a minute. I haven't been processing. What do I do? What does this look like? But when women can clear some mental space and men can actually engage then better and be more present and loving, women can be just as motivated, have just as strong of a drive. And so God gave us these drives as they're intended to be motivators. And I'll argue to love and serve our spouse. Like it builds then up in us, and we can then take that and draw that into actually loving and serving and caring for our spouse. It's a beautiful thing as God intended it. But here's the risk. When God makes something for good, the enemy is often trying to then distort it, and temptations come in, and then trying to reinforce that. And so what can happen is pornography, fantasy, extramarital affairs, infidelity then come in, because it's a distortion of God's intention that within marriage, that sex drive is then drawn to loving and serving our spouse, not just sexually. Actually, a lot of it will be outside of that, but yeah, sexually in that. But then when we start feeding a temptation, this is men and women, it's a lot of times we'll talk about it like it's a male problem. And there are more men that struggle with pornography, sexual addiction, those sort of things, but there are a lot of women too. And I encourage you, if that's you, you're not on your own in that. And we can even talk about this, I'll talk about it now. get support. Reach out. Pure Desire, they have some great ministries. There's 8 pillars for women, 7 pillars for men. Join Fortify. Freedom Session can even be an aspect of that, of then going down and layering into that with accountability of others. Because sometimes I'll sit with couples and they've one or both, often one, they're then feeding that temptation, the lust, the fantasy, the affairs, and what happens is it draws them away from their spouse, and it can actually feed an addiction. Like God put dopamine in our brain. It's a neurotransmitter that then reinforces pleasure, which can be beautiful. Man, if I'm then thinking about my spouse, if you're thinking about your spouse sexually, dopamine can be released. And then when you're having sex, then dopamine's released too. And you're creating these pathways that actually can draw us then towards our spouse. But when we start thinking, viewing pornography, fantasizing, we're creating pathways in the opposite direction. And then they say neurons that fire together, wire together. And it can be really hard to then find the off-ramp. And especially when an addiction comes in. And I sit with couples and they're just in the throes of this. It's sad. It's all-encompassing. It's painful. And oftentimes then there's so much shame going on for both often, whether it's a body image thing on the one hand of like, why am I not attractive to you? Do you not then want me? And it's what am I doing? I'm destroying our marriage and I'm creating distance in my relationship with God, and I feel so ashamed and enclosed in this. That's not God's intention, of course. And my encouragement would be get help with that. It's so necessary, so needed to be able to break free from that, so that we can then feed into, in a healthy way, our spouse. That pathway. We can reinforce that and actually draw us to greater connection than with them. So my challenge would be, and I'm stereotyping again, women, do your best to work on clearing space, managing anxiety, in order to be strategic in making time to be present for sex as much as you can. If there's the safety in the relationship and the connections then there, do your best in order to clear some space. And sometimes that means everything might not be just so. The spaghetti might still be connected, but you're going to try to then be as present as possible. And men, I challenge you, use your sexual drive to ask your wife, what can you do to help her clear space? Don't have the drive come up and then just move into a place of demanding or an expectation then for this. No, I mean, think of your vows on your wedding day of like to love and to serve and in sickness and health and everything. Like we're to love and serve and sacrifice in all things. And so when you're noticing like, hey, no, I'm kind of feeling like sex right now, what do you do with that? My encouragement would be use that drive to then say, hey, babe, what do you need? How can I be there for you? How can I care for you? How can I reduce stress in your life? How can I help clear space? And yeah, there's the asking, but sometimes you might even know, like you don't have to ask. I know that if I do this or do that, then I'm actually caring for you more so. Dr. Kevin Lehman, he writes Sheet Music, really good book. He says, the best way to improve your sex life, including your wife's desire for you, is to focus on the other 95% of your marriage and build that up. That's great wisdom. Foreplay all day. And not necessarily sexual foreplay, but like foreplay in the sense of like, I'm vacuuming, I'm doing dishes, I'm mowing the lawn, I'm playing with the kids, I'm doing this. We're sharing in things more so. I'm listening, I'm asking, I'm wondering, I'm affirming, I'm encouraging, like just basically pouring out towards your spouse to spice it up so that, yeah, sex can be even better for her, for you. Like it's better the more engaged you both can be. So fight for that presence, for that engagement. And then lastly, as we talk about sex, it's talk about it. Like debrief about the debriefing, if you know what I mean. No, actually talk about it. Like get to know each other. Here's the risk. Like pride can then come in. And then for men, it's like, well, what does Men's Health say about what women want in sex? Or what does, for women, Women's Weekly, I don't know if that's a magazine. What do they, or Cosmo, what do they then say? Like the 38 ways to please your husband and this. You know what? You've got a spouse. They've got ears. They may even have some ideas. Ask them. Like, what are your likes? What are your dislikes? Humble yourself to ask. Don't feel like you need to be a sexual goddess or a sexual, god, so to speak. Like I have to have it all together. No, ask them. So how was that for you? How are you doing with this? What can we do? Give a bit of a how-to guide. When you do this, I really love that. Can we pull back on this? That can be time of day, frequency. That can be actually the nature of what you're doing together. Talk about those things. And so as you focus on your emotional connection, you can build that sexual connection as we're talking about. And then this can really be empowered by then your spiritual connection. Like we talk about 3 different intimacies. There's spiritual, emotional, physical, or sexual. And the beautiful thing is they can pour in and out of each other. And they can sometimes, not to a full extent, compensate for each other. Man, the more emotionally connected, the more safety there is, the more we can talk about a relationship with Jesus and what matters there, the big picture purpose of life and in the details of life. And then also sex becomes that much greater because we can talk about it for one. And if you're not talking about it, start now. It's not going to be easier 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now. Start now, rip the Band-Aid off, have those conversations. It might be awkward at first. But then, yeah, we can build into this area. And so then we have these things. You want to build a marriage, you want your marriage to thrive, load into each of these areas, all 3 of them. And so then we can be empowered then by our spiritual connection. It's us and God, God with each other. It becomes a bit of that triangle piece where it really starts with us then leaning into our relationship with Jesus. We have a perfect example of this. So think about this for a second. Here's the gospel. Jesus was in heaven, like heaven. Like I know we can try to picture that, but like heaven, incredible. God the Father's there. Jesus is with him. There's no sadness, no pain, no sorrow. It is just goodness. There's love, there's joy, there is singing. It is incredible. It is incredible. I can't wait. It is incredible. Jesus was in there. And the Bible says that God so loved the world that he gave his only son. So he then sent Jesus. Jesus then chose to come down to this earth because we sin, we've sinned. The Bible says no one is righteous, no, not one. We've sinned, we've made mistakes. And the thing is, only perfection can get into heaven. It's a perfect place, and I'm thankful for that. I don't want any sin mess. I don't want other stuff to get in. Only that. But we can't get there because you've made mistakes, I've made mistakes. There is sin within our life, and so we need Jesus. So Jesus then chose to leave the perfection. Why? Because of his love for us. He lived a perfect life. He then died a brutal death. If you tuned into the Good Friday service or have seen Passion of the Christ, like it was brutal, undeserving, absolutely undeserving. He took on all of our sin, and then he was nailed to the cross. He died. He paid the price for our sin. And then he came back to life by the power of the Spirit, God's Spirit, the Holy Spirit, in order that if we believe in him, we could then be saved. And Scripture says that. If you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that he was raised from the dead, you will be saved. And what does that mean? That we can then stand at heaven's gates when we die. And we will then say, hey, I'm Josh Cruz. Like, I know who you are. I've got your name written down here. You accepted Jesus and what he did for you. Come in. Beautiful thing. We've got that example. Jesus sacrificed everything in order to bring that about for us. And the Bible talks about marriage as a representation of Christ, Jesus Christ, and the church. And so he loved us so much, he sacrificed everything and took on punishment for us that he didn't deserve, but we did. We've got him as an example for that. It says in John 15, greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. That's what he did for us, and that's what he's calling us to do in our marriage, to lay down our life. It says for their friends, right? This is your spouse. Like, that's even the next level for us. And we love because he first loved us. Powerful. Because naturally, sometimes I don't feel like loving. I don't. Sometimes you probably don't feel like loving as well. But we love because he first loved us. He can fill us to overflowing. Those fruits of the Spirit can then be in there so that we can do it in ways that we naturally can't because we have a supernatural power in order to love and serve our spouse. And part of how we do this, we pour into the needs of our spouse. Love languages I've talked about before. So if that term's new to you, there's a great book out there by Gary Chapman, and he talks about the 5 love languages. It's great. I mean, in the least, it then differentiates that we love and we experience love in different ways. But then it lays out the 5 categories of affirmation, so words of affirmation, what we're saying. This can be the reassurance, the safety, the softness, those sort of pieces. Quality time or time together. Some people feel most love. It's just, hey, sitting here on the couch with you. Like, we haven't even talked throughout this, but just being here, sharing in something, that's when I feel most connected and most loved. If that's the case for you, that's probably one of your primary love languages. Touch can be big, like even just then reaching out or cuddling, hand-holding. Touch isn't always sexual touch. And if you're approaching it that way, like the only touch you give is sexual touch, you're probably going to have less sex because touch needs to show up outside of that. That is that just even being close, that proximity piece. Gifts, this is low on the level for me, but for some people it's powerful. Wow, there was so much thought put into that. Wow, is that meaningful? I feel loved, I feel filled up. We can be doing this for our spouse. And then the fifth one is acts of service. These are the things that we do then for our spouse to help them. And for some, that's the primary one. It's, yeah, well, if you want to do this, then you can clean this up, you can do that, you can do that. And, oh, how is that loving? Well, for them it is. If that's you, let your spouse know. Like, it just tells me I matter, that you're there for me, that you're wanting to pour in. Because the risk would be you start pouring out in another way, and it's like, but that doesn't speak to me. Like, you said you love me, so words of affirmation, thank you. But that doesn't actually speak to me on that level. So we need to find out, okay, what are the love languages of our spouse, and pour out. The best way to find out is to ask them and then actually do it, powered by God to do it, because you're actually willing to love and serve in that way. We can then be slow to anger, to judgment, quicker to curiosity. When we're then filled to overflowing and then pouring out with love, it's easier to do that. And then we can pour the fruits of the Spirit on them. Man, I want a lot of that in my marriage. And I imagine you want a lot of that in your marriage too. Go to the source. Ask God, I need you in this. I surrender this. Like, and if we can actually fill up and do this, if I can do that in my relationship with Jesus, my spouse can do that too, and we can join in that, man, think of what we can do. Think of how much more powerful. That's that cord of 3 strands, not easily broken. Powerful then there. And then we can be on mission together. Because big picture, God didn't call everybody to be married. He didn't. Like Paul talks about, singleness can actually be a gift. What does he call us to? Sanctification, to grow, to become more like him, to glorify him in everything that we do and reflect him in that. He's called us all to that. And so we need to put marriage in its place. It matters. Absolutely it matters. But then he's also got his kingdom work that he's wanting to do, and he's wanting to use you. And a lot of times we get so much into fighting that we get distracted by that. But man, if we can work on our marriage and actually unite and build up together under him and go out, man, think of what could be accomplished. Not by your power, by his power, but your obedience, your health. Francis and Lisa Chan in their book, You and Me, they say, eternal mindedness keeps us from silly arguments. This is the having a sight set on heaven and what it is that God wants for us here on earth. There's no time to fight. We have better things to pursue than our interests. Too much is at stake. God created us for a purpose. We can't afford to waste our lives. We can't afford to waste our marriage by merely pursuing our happiness. It's not about that. It's about our holiness, as Gary Thomas talks about. Are you willing to sacrifice for your spouse? Are you willing to lay down your life for them? Really, like, do a heart check. Am I really willing to do that? Did I vow to do that on my wedding day? Whether you did or didn't, you can vow to do that today. Like, are you willing to lay down your life for your spouse, to really show them the greatest love? I mean, imagine if tonight you then made that commitment. Okay, God, I surrender my marriage to you. I surrender how I engage with my spouse. It's yours. And I'm going to make an ongoing commitment to do that by your power. How might tomorrow look? Like, even think about that. You get up tomorrow morning. What might you be doing? Like, picture that. And then even on the flip side, what might you not be doing? What are some things that aren't loving? And then going throughout the day, how might you be engaging with them? As we talk about those love languages, maybe you'd be reaching out a little bit more so, which builds safety, which builds connection and engagement. I mean, there's going to be days when you feel like loving and days that you don't. Oftentimes, if I'm doing a wedding, I'll put that out there. Like, that's then the reality. Sometimes it's going to come easy. Ooh, man, I'm feeling that love. This is great. It's just pouring out. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Easy to love. And other days it's like, no, this is a discipline. Like, I'm having to choose to love you on this day. And so if marriage is feeling overwhelming, I'd encourage you, actually surrender it to God. Maybe you're trying to do it in your own power. Maybe you should be praying more for your marriage. Pray for your spouse. Like, there's power there. Like, we've got access to the God of the universe who cares deeply about all things and cares so intimately about you and your marriage. He knows how many hairs are on your head. He breathed life in you. He's got plans for you. He knows all that. He's intimately involved. And for those of you who believe in Jesus and said, hey, I want you to be my Lord, my Savior, my treasure, God is then within you, empowering you to this. So when you pray for your spouse, that's powerful. When you pray with your spouse, even more powerful. Surrender it to him and see what he'll do with it. We can't do this on our own. Ephesians 3:20 says, now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us. We've got access to this. We can call on him in order to carry out the things that we naturally can't. And we can thank him for the beauty and even reflect on what are the things that I've seen God's hand in our relationship. Think about that. If the two of you united, if the two of you repaired what needed healing, if the two of you connected and came together in ways that you haven't before, and then you stepped out to love, to serve, man, think of what could happen. Like you want kingdom come here on earth? It can happen through your marriage. Two are better than one. You can do that. And I'd encourage you in that. So we're going to transition here. If you haven't already done this, get into the chat, drop down, like if you're full screen, make it smaller, and then really then type in what questions. Like this is the bulk of the material of what's going on. And I've got a few more points that a next step for you, and then we're going to jump right in. We're going to have Victor come out here, and we're just going to go. We're going to roll with it. So next step for you, my strong encouragement would be date nights. Keep them going. Like, we called it date night for a reason. We want you to be able to fight for and protect time to be together, especially if your love language is quality time. Man, this is gold right now. You're pouring in. You're investing in this. Fight for that time together, because the risk would be if you're not fighting for the time together, you're fighting during your time together. And you don't want that. Who needs that? Nobody does. It's draining. It's discouraging. And build that friendship. Those, as John Gottman talks about, love maps. Get to know each other. Ask questions. And you can go on Google and just questions to ask on a date. Like, awesome. Get to know pieces about your spouse that you didn't know before. And then you can follow up with these questions. Take a picture of the screen if you're not going to write it down. On your next date, or maybe you guys are night owls, especially you guys out on the East Coast. I can't believe you're still up. Awesome. Love having you here. Write this down and come back to it on your next pre-planned date night. Even plug it into your schedule before you go to sleep tonight. What's our cycle? So we're talking about these patterns. What is our cycle? What are the steps in that? What goes on under the surface for you when you fight? Notice it's a question. You're asking, you're engaging. Like, what happens for you when we fight? What are those steps, the behaviors? What goes through your head? Like, what are you telling yourself when we're in this cycle, this pattern? And what are you feeling? What's happening? And from this place, it's like, well, what do we do different next time? Those are those beautiful repair conversations. You're going to fight. In this world, you'll have trouble. And so conflict will then happen. But if you can come back to it and work on it, you can learn from it and actually continue to take steps down the road together. What are you needing from me when we are fighting or disconnected? This is that bottom level. And oftentimes you need to go through those steps to get there. Because sometimes it's like, well, what do you need? Sometimes we know, but a lot of times we need to further connect with, well, what was I telling myself? What was I feeling? What am I needing? I think I just need reassurance. I just need your closeness. I just need, let's go for a walk. Like, that helps me. I need space. Whatever it is, ask those questions, because that's then gold, because you want to try to get there as soon as you can. And then lastly, how do you show me you love me? So the wording of that is, I want you to ask your spouse, like, what do you do to intentionally show that you love me? Because you'd be surprised. I sit with couples and it's like, well, every morning I get you a cup of coffee, or I go get the mail, or I go do this, or I make sure that the kids are ready in the morning. And that's a big way that I'm showing you that I love you. And sometimes the spouse is like, what? Oh, I didn't realize that. Let's appreciate those things. We're attempting. We don't do it perfectly. But hey, what are some of the ways you try to show me that you love me? And then thank you, I appreciate that. As you continue to talk about what are the ways where you feel most connected, what are you needing from me, and then fold those in. You can redirect each other in that. Encourage you, go for walks. Rachel and I have loved that. COVID's then been hard, but being able to get outside, together walk, that actually works better for us than let's sit knee to knee, eye to eye, and just, hey, let's talk about the relationships. And what about this? What about that? Getting out, movement, that works for a lot of people. It's that shoulder to shoulder. And we have great conversations, and it's not always like serious this. A lot of times, like we'll do multiple walks a day in light of what we're in right now, and we're talking, debriefing the day together. Go for walks, then do that together. Counseling or workshops. Maybe this has highlighted some areas of, oh yeah, no, we've got a cycle. I'll tell you the behaviors, but I don't know what's going on under the surface, or I'm not sure how safe it is for me to make myself vulnerable. Or some of you are sitting there, you're then by yourself because your spouse then wasn't willing or able to then join in. You then can invite them into a counseling, or maybe invite them into a workshop, or in the least then for you, pray for them, lift them up, show them love in the best way that you know how, because you can't change them, but hopefully you can have an influence on them, and encourage them, shower that love then on them. But get help. Go talk to somebody. How can I do this? How can I do this in a better way? Books, like read books. So Creative for Connection, that's probably my favorite book. It talks about emotion-focused therapy. They talk about some of these patterns, these cycles, and going under the surface. And it's written a bit like a workbook too. So you can actually go in and it'll guide you in conversations. Love that. If you're gonna do one practical book, jump on that one. Love Languages, great book. Love and Respect, Emerson Eggerichs. You and Me, Francis Chan. Meaning of Marriage, Tim Keller. The Gift of Sex by the Penners, or Sheet Music by Kevin Lehman. Those are great too. Do something where you set aside time, like you did tonight. Like, you should be proud of yourselves to be able to then do this. Thank your spouse. Thanks for sharing in this with me if they're with you. And then, how do we do this again? Let's pop it in the schedule. Let's read a book together during that time. And then lastly, maybe it's doing a devotion together. Sacred Marriage is a good one by Gary Thomas. The Love Dare, 1 Year Love Talk. Do something where you guys can actually share and build some of that spiritual intimacy as a couple. And then you'll have even more things to talk about as you go out on walks, as you then get out into this world and really build the bond and connection in your relationship. Awesome. So we want, if you haven't typed them in, Q&A, let's do it. Let's get Victor out here.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh. That was incredible content. Hopefully there were some nuggets that really stood out for you and your marriage, and there's always room for growth. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of practical things. I loved how you brought in the idea of not just psychology, but it's intertwined into theology and scripture, and how that all plays a role into our marriages as believers. Mm-hmm. And so, and I loved all the Instapot shout outs. That was good.
Yeah, you like that? Yeah, I'm very proud of that. Yeah. I don't work for that.
Do you use it a lot? I don't use it that much.
We do. We go through waves. It takes up a lot of counter space, and that's the downside.
Yes.
But man, you can cook great chili. You can cook other things. It just boils it down before you know it. So yeah. I don't get royalties from them or anything unless you're listening. But no, they're wonderful.
Awesome. Yeah. We don't use it at all. We should probably use it a little.
No, you should. Send you recipes.
That's right. All right, let's get into it. So we have a variety of questions here. Like you said, when the rubber meets the road, we want to get into marriages in the details. So let's make time for that. One of the first questions that came up was Ephesians 4:25. This is maybe a little more of a theological bend to this question. Not letting the sun go down on your anger. Some issues just seem bigger than one day. Is that kind of ever okay to let it just sit? Maybe even going to bed angry and not having it resolved right away?
Yeah, I think it depends on, so the greater the activation, the greater the anger. So let's say it's 11:30 at night, and you are then angry about something. The risk would be, oh, no, we need to talk about this now. I might argue the sun's already down, so go to sleep. But yeah, it's like, no, we need to engage in this. But like as we were talking about, the more activated you are, that's probably going to go 96% chance in the disconnect end. And so that might be one of those, I then need to, before God, then I'm not going to let the sun go down on this. I need to be then engaging with him. Oh, got it. Like I'm surrendering this, being curious with him, like, show me my heart, show me what's going on. What am I so upset about? What's happening here? And then from that place, as things come down, and who knows, maybe that does happen later in the evening, most likely not. Then coming into that next day as the sun's coming up to then engage and be like, hey, can we talk about what happened last night? I noticed that so we own our steps. And then any revelation, like, I'm sorry, you didn't deserve that. Let's engage in that way. So no, I think it depends. You want to increase the likelihood of good engagement. But yeah, unless you're nocturnal, like, I wouldn't be doing fights at night. Like, how many times like couples are then sitting there and it's just like, yeah, well, we know, like, we started the conversation at this time. Well, don't. You're probably going to actually feed anger or start anger. So let's actually take a step back. If you don't want anger or the sun to go down on it, then watch when you bring things up. And if you're finding the only time is then right when we're laying in bed, then, and I realize easier said than done, and depending on your circumstances, fight for that time to be able to talk about these things outside of 11 p.m. at night. Or let's say one of you's upset, then say, hey, this is important. I'm not in a good space right now. Can we come back to it tomorrow? So what's happening? I'm not hanging on to bitterness and I'm not shutting down to you completely. I'm saying this is important. I'm just not in a good frame of mind. And so there's a bit of a peace or a soothing, and then actually come back to it.
Yeah, and I like what you said about the idea of actually using that time when you are away from each other to just focus on you and God and how am I processing this, praying through it. You're not just going to sleep, because usually you're staying up either way. You're thinking through all of those thoughts. You're reliving the argument. And so you might as well engage with God in that moment and allow him to kind of speak into it. That's great. So another question came up. What do you do when this timeout, this idea, you have this withdrawer, you have the pursuer. The withdrawer tends to kind of use the timeout excuse to just withdraw, and they don't necessarily come back to the conversation or even have a desire to. How would a pursuer or even just another withdrawer engage with that person?
Yeah, and that is the risk, and that's usually then the fear of the other withdrawer and or the pursuer that they're not coming back to this. Perfect world, you're both sitting there and it's like, are we committed to this? Can we talk about timeouts? How does that work? But that doesn't necessarily mean your partner is going to be. That's like, I got the timeout card. Great, I'm out. And then you feed into that. But I'd recommend outside of the moment, outside of the moment conversations are the best. Why? We're engaged, we can hear each other, we can put our intentions out there, and we can strategize a little bit too. So then I would recommend, like, coming out of this, hey, so we were talking about timeouts and even came up in Q&A as well. And so can we talk about what it would be like if you didn't engage? Or here's my fear that we start doing the timeout thing and I lose you. Like, you don't return to the table. I'm not trying to accuse you. Can I tell you what that would be like for me? I'm afraid that if you then disengage in that way, I'm going to get more panicky and I'm going to come after you. I'm not, hear my heart. I don't want to, but that's often what happens for me in that. What do you need in that moment? Because it sounds like you're wanting a timeout. I get that, but how can I help you re-engage? What is that? So we're trying to, we call it slicing it thinner. Well, how do we make this work then? If it's just blanket, timeouts are on, great, there they go, great. But no, what do we do? How can I make it safer for you to re-engage? Can you understand what goes on for me? And here are the likely consequences if we don't actually figure this out well.
So I got a really specific question around this idea of, look, COVID is probably bringing up, we're encouraged to, really press into building healthy habits, but there's probably the other side of this that's producing some unhealthy habits. One just being the idea of Netflix or binge watching or just going deep into social media and just kind of withdrawing. One specific question that was asked is around the idea of their spouse really going deep into video games and kind of gaming and kind of getting lost in that, spending tons of hours and just worried about it turning into addiction. You should even just brought up the idea of the children kind of are around and are watching, engaging with them. How does she enter into that conversation? And where does she even start?
Yeah, and that's tough because part of it would be how engaged is the other person. What I'm hearing is probably not that engaged. How willing are they to have the conversation? The more willing they are, the more room you have to work with. Because we can't change people, but we hope to have some sort of influence on them. So I would recommend for her then to, outside of the video game time, hopefully there's some outside of the video game time, but then saying and bringing up, hey, can we talk about something? Let's go for a walk. Can we do this? Especially if the face-to-face, knee-to-knee is too intense. And then bring up the concern and softly in there too. Here's the typical risk. Like, are you ever going to get off of there? Like, how long are you going to be on there? You know, the kids are right here and you should be actually engaging with them. What kind of a father are you? What kind of a this? What's happening? Well, I'm going to defend and or just shut down and I'm playing even more game. I'm going to go into that world or zone. But outside of the moment, if we can then bring up, hey, I have a bit of a concern, and intentions are huge. Put them out there. Like, and I'm not wanting to attack you. I'm not wanting to fight with you. But it's been hard for me seeing how many video games you're doing or how often. And but I also don't know how to engage with you around that because I'm worried that it'll feel like I'm criticizing you, or I don't want to undermine you in front of the kids. But I have some concerns around that. Can we talk about it? And hopefully, because of the softness, there might be a little more room. And you can't control this, but hopefully a little more room for him to start engaging. And then you're sharing the impact. It's really hard for me. Whether it's I miss you, whether it's I had hoped for more. I'm concerned for you. I'm not saying you're addicted, but that is part of what happens inside for me. Like I get afraid that this is going to keep going and spiraling, and then we as a family start losing you. And then I think the other piece would be the mental health aspect of, and this isn't always the case with video games, but is this a soothing thing from something bigger? Is he carrying something else? Like, did he lose his job? Still not an excuse. Is he finding the close quarters to be really difficult? What's going on in his life that may lead to him? Because if you think about addictions, a lot of times it's to soothe pain or something difficult. What might be going on? And you might even then like, hey, just curious, how are you doing? Like, what's going on? Like, even approaching from that. And that might soften him because if he opens up, he's engaging. And then talk about, because I'm noticing a little bit of this, of what's happening. You're doing video games even more so. And I care about you. And just, hey, how can we do this different?
There's another question around kind of in light of that. In light of COVID, a lot of people are working home now. It's crazy. You have kids, toddlers. You're trying to create new rhythms. And you're trying to make sense of your marriage. I know even for us personally, we have 2 kids under 3 years old.
Super cute.
It's a gong show. Yeah, super cute. But we love our kids.
Yeah.
But, it's hard not to kind of push your kids away when you're trying to work and focus. And he feels like you don't want him around, and creating those boundaries, and yet trying to be there in the house. And how's that, even then trying to make your marriage work in light of all of that and new rhythms, what practical advice would you give to a spouse in that?
Yeah, first off, it's hard. Like, it's just straight up, it's hard. It is so difficult. Outside of COVID, I'm pretty good with boundaries around time in this. I want my family to know I'm accessible when I'm there, meaning I'm not then diving into my phone or doing this. And so I often try to, if I have work to do, I'll then do it at work. And it might mean at times I'm staying a little bit later, but I'm trying to finish it out so that Dad's here, he's here. Like, I can engage with him. There we go. Dad works from home now. Mom works from home now. Like, the environment looks so different. And yeah, kids are like, well, hey, can we play now? What about this? And the risk is then we get irritated, agitated, and I get it. Man, I've got to get this done. What's happening here? I think a big part would be, and this all depends on the ages of the kids, because sometimes they just won't get it. Yeah. Dad, you're here. Let's play. Let's go do this. Why don't we do this? Why do you keep looking at this thing and pounding away or talking?
Yeah, I've had like Zoom calls in the office where like kids are literally crawling around me and I'm trying to act professional. It's terrible. Yeah.
Real quick, have you seen that YouTube video where the guy's like doing this and the kid comes in the room and he's just doing his best?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, amazing.
But that's then part of it. It's like we're trying to continue to do our work as if we're still at work, but we're not. And the kids, especially the young ones, they don't understand. And so my encouragement would be fill them up as much as you can. So if they're up in the morning, you might need to get up a little bit earlier. And I realize that's a sacrifice, but fill their love tanks. Like, because then here's the risk. Get up, no contact, nothing. And then Dad's just sitting there and it's like, yeah, when am I going to be able to engage? But if we can then actually enter and engage, it's almost like they're hungry. They're hungry for our affection. And so if we give them nothing, they start starving and acting out, and then they'll start zooming around. But then if we can then be proactive and actually like, hey, bud, what do you want to do? What is... or even just whether it's physical contact, that idea. And that won't then prevent them from coming back. Like, they're kids, right? They love you. That's awesome. And then you might just have to, with your spouse, then figure out, well, what do we do in terms of times or rhythms of the day? A lot of times with my kids, they'll then ask, my youngest is 9, and so we can have more of the conversations of, when are you done today, Dad? Or are you taking a break? That's been one of the beautiful things around COVID. I'll go jump on the trampoline for a little bit, but I'll tell them, oh, at 11:30, I'm going to take a break. So then what happens is, it's like, Dad, what am I going to eat? Kind of, what am I going to feed in our relationship? Like, oh, 11:30? All right, and then go somewhere else. And so make sure you're feeding them in terms of the relationship, and then work out something with your spouse around, can we fight or protect times? Because here's then the risk, you don't get as much done, and now your evenings you're both trying to catch up. And I get it, sometimes there's seasons of that, but if you can, you need to feed the marriage too. And that's where it's, can we even just have 30 minutes? We're disconnected, we're here, and it doesn't have to be super intense. Sometimes it's just we're together without other stuff then going on.
That's good. Now, there's another question. You talked about it a bit, the idea of different sex drives. Is that just a reality where one of the spouses just has to accommodate that? Like, speaking to that a little bit more, what does that look like? What are some practical tips you can give into that?
Yeah, and that's tough because, man, we can be on very, very different ends of the spectrum around that too. And I was saying earlier, like, it's not just men here, women here. Like, no, it's all over the place. It's more about where are you and what do you do with that? I think it's back to that, what is the impact? Hey, if we could have more frequent sex, what might that be like for you? Here's how it would impact me. Okay, here are my difficulties around that or concerns. Look at barriers. What gets in the way of that? Right. So let's say it's a frequency sort of thing. Then what makes that hard? I am just so tired. And okay, what can I do to help you with that? Is there anything in that? Part of it would be sometimes it's even just grieving. To be honest, and that's where we do premarital counseling, and let's talk about sex frequency, with the nature of this. What does that look like in terms of so oral sex or this or that or this? Let's be really real, because if you're coming in with an expectation that's unmet, man, that can be incredibly disappointing again and again. But sometimes we have to grieve. If you're then so if I'm sitting there with a couple and he's, I'll stereotype, but he's 9 times a day, oh, it's going to be so good. And then I look over and she goes into freeze mode. He's probably going to have to adjust. But let's talk about that. What are you thinking? Whoa, yeah, a little different than that. And so that doesn't mean, I guess you're at 9 then. It's the greatest numerator. There we go. We're going to go there. No, what works for the two of you? And what does a compromise then look like as much as possible? So 9's going to have to come down. And is there a way that she can engage a little bit more so? Or let's say it's a sex reversal, so to speak. And maybe she then needs to compromise a little bit more in coming down, and he needs to engage a bit more. But it's those conversations of, so how are we doing? What's this like? Let's not try to put a burden or a weight on them. Let's work together in that. Hey, I wish that we could, let's say more often. Okay, what's getting in the way of that? How do we work together to make that more of a reality?
What would you say to a 9 coming down? Some practical ideas of just
how do you adjust to that?
Yeah, how do they adjust?
Some of that's just facing the reality. If you look at this, it's you've got your expectations, and then you've got the reality, and then you've got this gap. And so a 9 is a big gap, unless you're married to another 9. And then I don't know how you work. I don't know how you do anything.
It doesn't matter.
Yes, birth control budget. So yes, there's a gap in here, and that's usually when we talk about grieving, it's where it's coming to a place of acceptance. There might be frustration around that, might be difficulty around that. You really have to watch if you're then at a 9, and I'm not saying this across the board, but also, am I feeding this sex drive somewhere else? Am I actually perpetuating that, whether that's through lust or fantasy, those sort of things. And sometimes it's even, am I continually, every time I look at my spouse, I'm just going through all these scenes in my head and just thinking of that. There's a time and a place that can then be good. But if you're at a 9 and needing to come down, you might have to do just some behavioral type stuff where it's no, not think about that right now. Hey, let's think about something else. Because you feed that, you feed the drive, the desire in there. But it would be, it's kind of the harsh reality part of, it's not going to be 9. So what's going on for you right now as you hear that? I can tell you, it won't be 9. And there can be anger, frustration, disappointments. It's a real thing, right? There can be temper tantrums then coming in, But what's the alternative? He holds to the 9, and then she's down in that zone, and incredible resentment, disappointment. Okay, the risk would be not enough, not good enough, duty, I'm having to dial it in, and then rarely actually present to have good sex. And it's like, yeah, but I then need more or want more. And so, yeah, no, you might have to, it's a loss. Like, for you, it's a loss. It's almost like somebody died. And so it doesn't that sound so?
Yeah, that's it.
But that's what it's probably going to feel like then for them. And okay, so how do we come to a place of a greater acceptance of what is, and even a place of gratitude for what is as well?
It's good. It's like a death in the family. All right, moving on. I like this. Shifting gears a little bit, prayer.
Yes.
So, praying as a couple, we hear it a lot. Sometimes it's just stiff, it's awkward. I have my thing, you have your thing. Why do we have to do it together? What's a good gauge? Like, how often? How do you even make it less awkward? What would you say to that?
Yeah, well, I'll start on the one end. In terms of frequency, I think you work your rhythms. I think it's good to have a bit of a ritual or routine type thing, because if you wait for it to show up and just naturally come into place, you're probably not going to do it. Like, and that's that discipline part of, well, let's make sure whether it's how we start our day, and extended, especially if you don't have kids, like mealtime, let's share our day, and then let's close out our meal praying for each other. We don't have to say, what can I pray for you for? We just talked about that. We know that. So that can be a grounded ritual type thing. Maybe it's before you go to bed, but it's going to be so person by person. Yeah, Rach and I have tried different things, because then for me, it's like bedtime of, hey, let's pray together right now. And bedtime is like sleep time for her, go figure. And so that doesn't work, but she's much better in the morning. And we've then tried to do that, and then me trying to get up early. And so then more it's, let's find a point of the day that we can connect in that way. In terms of the awkwardness, I mean, that goes for conversations about sex, basically any difficult conversation. You rip the Band-Aid off, but even just acknowledge that. Like, it might be like you're sitting there right now of, I do kind of want to do that, and it is kind of awkward. And can we just say that? Like, yeah, praying with you is awkward. Like, that's what you're working with, right? And so what do we want to do about that? Well, let's just start in. And then especially if you've never prayed together, like, I won't go too far on this, but it's intimate. Like, God knows you, like everything. He knows what you're going to say and pray even before you do. Like, you're pretty exposed and vulnerable, but the beauty is there's the safety there, and there's the love there. And then your spouse then, if they're then having that same connection with him, now we're going to come together and share it. It's a beautiful thing. Like, oh man, can we connect in that? And there's power there. There's unity in there. But because of that, it's also intimidating. Like, all right, I guess we're going to do this. You go. You go. Let's just wait. But no, let's just start. Just real quick. And it doesn't, and especially if you've never even just prayed before, there isn't a formula. It's just, hey, God, it's Josh. Can you be with Rachel? Like, she's struggling with this right now. Can you help her?
Do you start your prayers with that? It's Josh. Let him know.
Yeah, just check
Josh
him in here.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good.
But then make it like a telephone call, that idea. And then same thing back. And it's going to look different. Some people might have all these words and all this, and great, good for you. It's more about putting your heart out there. And some people might start with, hey, it's Josh. And then don't judge. It's just,
No judgment.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
That's great. So, what if it's not equally, there's not equal investment? Your husband doesn't want to put as much effort into the marriage without being nagging, without, having to sit him down all the time and wanting to talk about it, and he doesn't. Like, how do you kind of woo him to the idea of, let's work towards a thriving marriage?
Yeah. Man, is it hard. I meet with a lot of, whether it's wives or husbands then coming in and just saying, well, I'm here by myself, as you can clearly see, and my marriage isn't in a good place. And they're not here because they don't want to work on it. That's a heavy load to carry. We don't come into marriage with, hey, maybe that'll happen. No, we come in because we do want to share in life together. And so oftentimes provide emotional support for one, and it's, what can you do? What does this look like? So there's some distance, there's some disconnect. I think of three things. It's so God, like, surrender your relationship to God. If they're going to come back, it's because God's doing a movement in them and they're being obedient to that. So battle for them. Like, God, bring them to me. Let them hear you, soften. Because, God calls us to have healthy marriages. That's part of his desire for us. So then, okay, pray against the enemy and what he's trying to do to create disconnect in there. And then the second part would be ownership. So then even to reflect, okay, what are some things that I might have done to create some of the distance, maybe led to, and it's not a blame thing, but what might I have done to then lead to him or her then disengaging in the way that they are? And then you can actually come and make amends in that, like, and approach, whether it's a letter or actually going to them and be okay, yeah, hey, Rach, can we talk? I know things haven't been good for us, and I realized, and I've really been praying about this, and I haven't been loving you in this way. I've been doing this, I've been doing that, and I'm so sorry, because I imagine it's discouraging for you. And who knows, a door might open up there. And then the third one would be whatever healing is then needed. Like, make sure you're getting support, healthy support. So yeah, if you're a woman, then you're not going out to then other men to get that support. You're finding that support in other women, counselors, because you're going to need that encouragement. Like, it's a heavy load to carry. And so you want them to lift you up. You want them to be praying for you and praying for the marriage. You have to watch what you're feeding your brain with, because if you're then going out, let's say, your wife, and then you're going out to the ladies, and there was like, oh, that dirtbag here. You don't need that. That's not even healthy. That's actually going to create greater distance. But you need people to say, how are you doing? Can I pray for you in that? Talk about what are some of the things that you can own. Ask God for forgiveness, and then go to them, acknowledge that, and hope that your softness, your humility, and your acknowledgement will help them re-engage. And even just ask, hey, what's happening in your world? What's going on? Because, it can be painfully lonely.
Yeah. All right, pornography. So let's lean into that a bit more. Obviously, it's crippling for marriages. I've heard stories in my pastoral experience of just marriages who have actually broken over it, marriages who have obviously reconciled through it. You have a spouse who, it looks like an addiction to pornography, which, that's a hopeless place. That feels very hopeless on both ends.
Yes.
And there's shame, like everything you're saying. Speak into that a little bit about how is a spouse supposed to support their spouse, in that.
Yeah. You'd have to be aware of it. And so it's then come out into the open in some sort of way, whether it's a disclosure or they're caught in it. But hey, here's something that's coming in between us. I think, as I was saying a minute ago about the addiction part of it, especially if it's an addiction, always curious about what's behind it. Like, what are they soothing? What are they trying to numb out, disconnect from? And so even approaching it in that regard, but not excusing or condoning it. I think it's okay to say, like, hey, this has to stop. Like, this has to change. But the big part is, but you're not on your own in that. How do I come alongside you? How do I then help you develop a support network? I typically don't recommend the spouse as then the direct accountability. Like, oh, hey, looked this up. Hey, did this. Went to this place in my head, that idea. Have an outside support then for that. And so then if you're struggling with that, like, reach out. Like I was talking earlier about, so Pure Desire, they now have online groups. One of the beauty of COVID, that you can get into a sexual addiction focus group. We do freedom session groups here, and they're general, but a lot of times then you can lean into sexual addiction with that and hopefully go layers into your healing. And then you may have to go back to another round or keep that community going. But you need that outside support. If it has power over you, then you're actually talking more addiction at that point. I can't pull back from it. You need as much of that support as possible. So then as a spouse, you can provide some of that. You can challenge. You can talk about the impact it has on you, not to shame them, but just the reality. Like, I get so discouraged when I hear that you've slipped up in that way. It actually, it makes it really hard for me to want to have sex with you, knowing that this is what you're thinking about, or and are you comparing me? And I find myself shutting down. And so trying to have some of those honest and difficult conversations around the impact of it, and then challenging them to get the support. And what are you going to do? How are you going to lean into this? Sometimes you have to get quite firm with that, because it's, it can be like an infection in the relationship. And, well, I guess she's never going to change. He's never going to change. It's going to be an ongoing thing. That's dangerous. I would actually be fighting for coming alongside them, supporting them, challenging them to take a next step in that.
That's good. So how do you keep a marriage thriving when one of them, whether the wife or the husband, is working, months at a time, traveling, long distance relationships? How do you make a marriage thrive in the midst of that?
You have to get creative, that's for sure. Yeah, definitely talk about how is that working for us. And it might be working for one over the other. But either way, how do we do this? Make sure your schedules are apparent, like even practically. Make sure you know when you're coming or going. Like I come back to that feeding the relationship. If you don't know when they're going to go, for how long, when you're going to re-engage, it starts to unsettle us. And the risk is we start getting into more of those patterns or those cycles. But if you can have conversations to even know, okay, she's going away, she's got a business trip in a week, and she's gone for a week. Okay, how do we plan that? How do we then even have some rituals or routines when she's about to go away? Let's make sure that night before, whether it's then we go out on a date, we slow things down, whether it's sex, whether it's praying together, or all of the above, we have some sort of rhythm or routine, but also that return rhythm or routine as well. It's that re-engagement. We've had some apart. We need to feed a little bit more, so fight for that time, and then get really creative on the road, whether it's phone calls, beauty of technology. We've got FaceTime. As you know, if you're doing Zoom meetings, FaceTime, Skype, whatever it is, it's not the same. I get that, but it's something. And you can actually then engage and really then sit down as if you're with each other, or even, and I found this to be helpful, even just you could put FaceTime on and you're doing an activity. Like, so let's say you're in your hotel room and then your husband's then back at home. Well, then you're both on FaceTime, and it doesn't have to be just, okay, in your day and this, and that might work for you and that's great. But for others, it might be, hey, let's hang out for 30 minutes. And we can have some engagement here. But there's some, not physical contact, but emotional contact that's coming in. And then the ongoing, how's this working for us? Like I'm a big fan of check-ins. How are we doing? And it gives voice it's that short accounts piece. Like, let's make sure that we're doing the best we can in light of what's going on. And even just acknowledging travel's tough, because the risk would be no conversation, then all of a sudden travel becomes, it's like the other person in the relationship. Oh, here comes another trip. And that's such a difficulty, especially if the one partner doesn't really have like much say over it. It's the job. And usually then the other person knows that, but it's just hard. But can we come alongside each other and just say, this is tough. It is tough. I know it's hard. How can we make the best of it? And even just having that conversation says, hey, this matters. And we're gonna roll the best that we can.
Josh, this has been incredible. There's been so much insight, so much wisdom here. We really appreciate making time. And I'm sure there's been some insights or some nuggets for you. And like you said, Josh, like actually go away, whether tonight or tomorrow, make a point of don't allow too much time between it to sit down and think through maybe one or two of the ideas and how it can make your marriage thrive in a more profound way. We want to encourage you also, I know we're wrapping up here. We have a class starting next Tuesday. It's the Book of Exodus. I know it's a bit of a different, bit of a shift of focus, but we're going deep into the Book of Exodus. Maybe for you that just feels like, man, that's a dry book, or I've just never really delved deeply into that book. I want to encourage you. This is the Word of God. This is what we're engaging with. This is your Bible. And so study it with us. And we want to delve into the book of Exodus with you. That's with Jeremy Johnson, one of our executive pastors. He's an incredible, knowledgeable guy in the Old Testament.
Yeah, great teacher.
So I would encourage you to sign up on our website. You can find the link there. And Josh, would you mind just praying us out?
Sure. Yeah, God, we thank you for this time. Thank you for each person who's been able to tune in. Ask that whatever seeds were planted, that they would be watered and grow, and that each of the couples would be able to have really good conversations and maybe even some difficult conversations. And I ask for your blessing on them, that may they have a marriage that thrives. Ask for your protection over them too, as they then strive to draw closer together and heal and grow. And I pray for your empowerment to then come over them, that they would be able to heal, connect, and then really go out and carry out the work that you have for them individually. Love on them. I thank you for your love for them. Make your presence known to them. Go with them. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. All right, guys. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you later.
Thank you.
watch the ocean